Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today our focus is going to be on the company Berkshire Hathaway, ticker BRKB. As most everyone is aware, the company is headed by legendary investor Warren Buffett, and it is my largest single investment. In this video, we'll take a quick minute to look at their financials, perform a stock valuation, compare their stock performance, and then we'll look at my purchases into Berkshire. And at the end of the video, we'll look at my portfolio's overall performance. So let's jump right into it. At first glance, there are some down years peppered in red, but overall, impressive growth for a company this size over the past decade. And starting off at the top with revenue, that has grown more than 125% over the last 10 years. Next, net income and earnings per share. These were negative in 2022, but that had to do with the market being down for the year and needing to account for the paper losses. But recovering in 2023, and since 2014, net income is up by more than 380%, while earnings per share is up by nearly 450%, each of which is roughly a 20% CAGR during this period. And again, this is a pretty impressive growth and something I was not anticipating. And those that follow Berkshire know that Buffett does not pay a dividend. So moving on to shares, which is down more than 10% over the decade, as this is something Buffett prefers to do instead of paying the dividend. Then free cash flow. The company is a money-making machine with nearly 30 billion in cash generated for 2023. And as we mentioned a moment ago, though net income and earnings per share were negative in 2022, but the company did generate close to 22 billion in cash for that year. While overall for the decade, free cash flow is up more than 75%. So let's jump down now and perform the stock valuation. Here's the valuation setup, and we'll look at making a modification in a moment. And if you get any useful information, I ask you to consider liking and subscribing to the channel. But for the intrinsic value, I have $341.25, and with a 90% margin of safety, brings that down to $307.13. And this is based on a short-term growth rate of 13% over the next 10 years with a 10% discount rate and using a 3% long-term growth rate. Now, up here in the top right, the net income CAGR and earnings per share CAGR for the past 10 years, as I mentioned, was roughly 20%. Very impressive for Berkshire and something I wasn't expecting to be so high. But I am using only a 13% short-term growth rate just because I just don't know if they can sustain that 20% level for another 10 years. And we have to see how Berkshire performs once Buffett's no longer around. So that's why I'm being conservative, using that 13%. Though the stock is trading around 400 or just over $400, so a little bit higher than my valuation. But let's just see what type of growth rate we do need to get to that $400 mark. So I'm going to change this short-term growth rate from 13 to, let's look at 15%. So with that 15% short-term growth rate, intrinsic value jumps up to just over $400, and with that 90% margin of safety, brings it down to 360. So the market is valuing the company at this 15% short-term growth rate, and as I mentioned, it is below what they CAGR'd over the past 10 years for the net income and earnings per share. So maybe this is a more accurate valuation with this 15%. And hey, if they can keep up this growth rate, I'd be very happy as a shareholder in Berkshire. But let's look at a few other data points first before we move on. And first one, PE ratio, see just over 9. So yeah, it is in that value opportunity range, actually well in that value opportunity range. Then long-term debt to free cash flow. I normally like seeing companies under 3. See Berkshire is just over 4, but I'm not too concerned because the company has plenty of cash on the side, and I'm sure Buffett got favorable rates when taking out any debt that they did. So this is not a major concern for me, only because it's Berkshire. Then, as we discussed during financials, they don't pay any dividends, so no dividend growth or yield. And then share count. So, as I mentioned, about 10% is actually just over 11%, almost 12% decline in the share count. So, something I always like seeing in the company. And then net profit margin for the last 10 years, 13%, and last 3 years 3%. I like seeing 10% or higher, and this does take into account last year, which was negative because of the overall stock market being down and taking those paper losses. So still impressive net profit margins for Berkshire. I'm happy to see that, and this would have been higher if we don't include 2022. And one other data point I like looking at is return on invested capital. It's very important for an investor, and I like seeing 10% or higher. See, the 10-year and 3-year was over 8%, and the 5-year was at that 10%, and the 1 year over 14%. So overall, I think good signs, and I know Buffett is going to invest the money to return maximum value to shareholders. But let's move on now, and we'll just compare Berkshire stock price movement over the past several years. So I know there's a lot going on here, but we're going to try to compare Berkshire stock price movement to a few other data points. So Berkshire is the red and green line. S&P 500, the SPY ETF, is the blue line. The ARK Innovation ETF, which is pretty popular, is the yellow line, and the QQQ ETF is the purple line. And this is for the 10-year. And though ARK Innovation had that big jump, we can see from 2020 to 2022, it hasn't gone up much since. But for this 10-year, Berkshire has beaten both the S&P 500 and ARK Innovation, while Berkshire's up about 220%, S&P is up about 175%, while ARK is up just over 120%. However, QQQ pretty much doubling Berkshire. That's up, looks like almost 440%. So though Berkshire beat those other two, but QQQ definitely outperformed. But let's check for the 5-year next. 5-year, pretty similar. Berkshire has beaten both the SPY and ARK again, though QQQ definitely outperformed once again. And let's check the 2-year next. Then slightly different results for the 2-year. Berkshire and the S&P 500 pretty much have the same growth during this time period, but has beaten ARK Innovation, though once again underperforming the QQQ ETF. Now let's just check the 1-year. And then for the 1-year, we're back to Berkshire beating both the S&P 500 and ARK Innovation, though once again falling behind QQQ. So let's move on now and look at my purchases into Berkshire. Here are my purchases into Berkshire, and this is the last time I bought into it was back in 2020. Though I did buy into it several times before 2020, I just don't have that data set up to show it. But we can see these initial investments. The one back in March is up 128%, while the one in May up 113%. Compared to the S&P 500, if I bought into the ETF on those days, up 113 and just over 81%. So overall, these two investments or these two buy-ins are up just over 127%, while comparing to the S&P 500, including the dividends I would have gotten from that, I'd be up just over 121%. So far, Berkshire is slightly outperforming. And for these two buy-ins, my cost basis is $177. And as we mentioned during the valuation, stock price is trading just over 400. So down below is my actual buy-ins into Berkshire. You can see my cost basis overall is about 115,000, and with the gains so far, the current price is about 200 or just over 271,000. So I am happy. Yeah, we did see when we're comparing the growth, the QQQs would have been a better investment, but you can't put all your money into one investment, or at least I can't. So still happy with these gains. Now, let's move on and we'll look at my portfolio's overall performance. Here's my portfolio's performance, in Berkshire in the top center being my largest single stock investment. And right below that is my next largest single stock, which is Palantir, which has been performing pretty well for me since first buying in a few years ago. The one to the left is just a index, so not including that as a single stock. And also, though, I will mention I recently been buying into QQQ starting about 2 months ago, which we can see over on the right-hand side, though slightly down for me. But hope you enjoyed this video, got some useful information. If so, consider subscribing. Hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.